The shotgun deaths of 3 people at an English private school earlier this month have prompted renewed calls for changes to laws controlling gun ownership. Epsom College head Emma Pattison, her husband George and their 7-year-old daughter Letty were found dead in the grounds of the school earlier this month. Last week, an inquest found catastrophic failings led to the shotgun deaths of 5 people in Plymouth on the 12th of August 2021, when 22-year-old Jake Davison killed 4 people before turning his weapon on himself. My next guest, Peter Squires, a Professor of Criminology at Brighton University, joins me now to discuss whether the time has come to change the laws governing gun ownership. Good evening, thank you for joining me.
Good evening to you, yes.
Tell me first of all, what is the scale of gun deaths of this sort in this country?
You mean of people with firearm licences killing people?
We're dealing with shotguns here in the main, aren't we?
Yeah, almost entirely shotguns. It's the last real data that was collected by the Home Office referred to 14% of gun homicides being inflicted by people with licensed shotguns. Since then, they've not kept the data, and I've argued that this is an oversight, but nevertheless. So the Gun Control Network has kept its own log of media reports of gun deaths, and there are 30 gun deaths a year, and around 5 of those in any given year will be people who have a gun license and therefore hold that weapon in trust, keep it in their own home where it's vulnerable, I would say, and they have generally killed their partners, sometimes their partners and their children, sometimes their partners and their children and themselves. Family annihilation situations. So yes, there are a number of them, not a lot, but it's a persistent problem.
And what is the legislation covering gun ownership here? I suppose what I'm really asking is, how easy is it to obtain a licence to hold a shotgun or multiple shotguns in the home?
If you want a shotgun, it's slightly easier to get a shotgun than a rifle, and that's an issue I think we need to address because they're both lethal firearms. But you have to suggest why you need one, and it's really, if you can suggest why you'll need one as a pest controller, a gamekeeper, farmer, or a sports shooter, and that's generally where the major problem has lain. It's up to the police to argue why you don't merit a shotgun license. You say you want one, you come up with evidence, you have your referees, you go through the licensing process, and that's meant to weed out people who really have no claim, no legitimate claim to own a weapon.
Stuart, is this something that you think that there is a need to tighten up or to change legislation? I'm very much in favour of those who are out there who are legitimately owning shotguns and the rest for hunting, for sport and all of the rest of it. But does it sound to you like we're in a situation where there's a need for change?
Well, I think there's always a need to review processes. The scale of the problem, obviously, in the UK is nothing approaching what goes on in the USA. Lots of my friends have got shotgun licences. They've all gone through the due process and been granted the licence. Mm-hmm. I don't know many people who have rifles. I know 1 or 2. One of the things that struck me was that the cost of actually getting a shotgun licence and a rifle licence, they're both between £80 and £85. But the cost of doing the clearance procedure, the sort of profiling, if you like, is somewhere in the region of £500. So it's not, the licensing thing is not paying its way. And that may suggest that it's too easy to get one. I'm no stranger to guns. I've shot guns during my military career, always in a controlled environment, and always been very careful about the rules and regulations and how to handle them without endangering other people. I think in Scotland, without being too Scottish exceptionalist about it, we've got a slightly different perception because of Dunblane and the fact that air rifles are also now under firearms legislation. And I had an air rifle for pest control when I lived up in the hills. And when I moved away, I sensibly handed it in because I had no further use for it.
Yeah. Peter, Peter, to come back to you, what changes would you say legitimately be considered? But as Stuart's saying here, there are reasons, absolutely legitimate reasons to hold shotguns. So what changes would you suggest?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not anti-gun. I think we need to regularise our processes for licensing them. I think the bottom line, it comes down to the fact that police forces have had to run licensing on a shoestring for many years. The licence fee has not changed for years. It's £80 for a 5-year licence. That's £16 a year. Now as your other guest commented, that in no way covers the kind of security and checks and clearances that are necessary to assess if someone is suitable to have a gun. And we've enhanced those checks. There is a much more built-in check with medical authorities. Other people have to provide references. And I would go further, that it ought not to be something that is simply done on a 5-yearly basis as if it were a mere clerical exercise by the police, but there ought to be more proactive visits, unannounced visits, dip checks, perhaps even monitoring of some people's social media to make sure they're not making the kinds of threats that send an alarm bell ringing that this person is going off the rails. And that needs to be constant. The monitoring has to be constant. Therefore, it's going to be more expensive. But that's the way we weed out people who are perhaps developing dementia. There's a real problem in America that gun owners are getting older, and many of them are becoming confused. And we need to maintain a check on people's mental health if they've got a firearm in the home.
Are there reasons for thinking that where in these situations where it's a man killing his partner, sometimes children, and then himself, these tragedies that we read about, not all that irregularly, they wouldn't happen if the shotgun hadn't been available to that individual? Would they not just find another way to commit the crime? Is the argument that if that possibility, that weapon wasn't in the equation, that the deaths would not occur?
I think you rightly raised the question that often the killing comes at the end of a lengthy period of domestic violence, and by the way, that should be another thing that is monitored to ensure that the person is of sound mind and not committing other violent offences against their family members. But you can't do that on an £88 5-yearly licence shoestring. And it's my argument, and I've been making this point for 10 years, that the kind of security checks that the police have to make, they will always scrimp and scrape on and run it on a shoestring if that licensing process is not fully funded. It costs the police to do it. If they had the resources to do it, my argument is they would do it better, they would be better trained, there would be a better national protocol, and they would be better at enforcing this legislation. We've heard many times about austerity policing, and frankly, the net is getting frayed, and cases are slipping through.
Evidently,
it's not. A shotgun is not cheap, and I am absolutely gobsmacked at the argument that people can't afford these licenses. Well, if they can't afford these licenses, I don't think they can afford the shotguns and the ammunition. It's a public safety priority, and we ought to take it more seriously.
Evidently, Peter, it's a very difficult balance that has to be struck between personal liberty, legitimate ownership, and public safety. A very difficult judgment call. Peter Squires, Professor of Criminology at Brighton University, thank you for your input this evening.
OK, thank you. Good night.
Thank you.